This is ILTV on the hour, bringing the biggest stories from Israel and the Middle East. I'm Shosh Bedrosian here in Tel Aviv. It is 9 p.m. and it is 2 p.m. in New York. Thank you for joining our special live breaking news coverage on the rising tensions on Israel's northern front as clashes escalate with Syria and the Jewish state moves to defend the embattled Druze minority. Let's get into all the top headlines at this hour. The Trump administration is now asking Israel to de-escalate the situation inside of Syria after fresh airstrikes on Damascus took place this afternoon in response to the violent clashes on the Druze community there, according to Axios. They also report the Trump administration is close to an agreement to de-escalate the situation between Israel and Syria. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is calling the violent clashes amongst the minority groups a misunderstanding between the Israeli and Syrian governments and is working to de-escalate the situation in the coming hours. All of this as the United States is trying to broker more opportunities of peace and normalization in the region amongst Israel, the United States, and Arab countries. Let's take a listen to what Secretary of State Marco Rubio had to say this afternoon.
Yeah, it's complicated, obviously. These are historic, long-time rivalries between different groups in the southwest of Syria, Bedouins, the Druze community, and it led to an unfortunate situation and a misunderstanding, it looks like, between the Israeli side and the Syrian side. So we've been engaged with them all morning long and all night long with both sides, and we think we're on our way towards a real de-escalation and then hopefully get back on track in helping Syria build a country and arriving at a situation there in the Middle East that's a lot more stable. So in the next few hours, we hope to see some real progress to end what you've been seeing over the last couple hours.
In the Druze community say a ceasefire has been reached just one day after the initial ceasefire broke from the rising violence and tensions there. Upwards of 200 people have been killed in these violent clashes, according to reports just this week in Syria, after the government's forces enter Sweida, a predominantly Druze city, when violence between the Druze and Bedouin tribes broke out. Islamist forces also joined the fight inside of Sweida, aligned with government forces. That's when horrifying videos were released of religious Druze leaders being targeted with armed men in military uniforms, forcibly shaving their traditional mustaches and beards. Not only that, forces defaced religious Druze sites, causing violence to innocent Druze civilians, spitting on them as they also remove facial hair that is traditional to their culture. Israel has vowed to protect the Druze community in Syria as the Jewish state is home to thousands of them, specifically located in the Golan Heights. Therefore, Defense Minister Israel Katz ordered strikes not only on military vehicles and infrastructure near Sweida, but in Damascus. The defense minister took to X, telling the Druze community in Israel, quote, "You can count on the Israeli Defense Forces to protect your brothers in Syria. Prime Minister Netanyahu and I have made a commitment, and we will keep it." We are going to show you very soon here those massive airstrikes that took place inside of Damascus. This is what you're seeing on your screen right now with several airstrikes in a row. Look at the plumes of smoke there. Absolutely massive. Now, a Syrian Druze activist actually told me, who was actually fighting off these militia groups near Sweida, that his community is fighting until the last breath after the violence they endured, especially against the women and elderly there. He also told me they appreciated the IDF's airstrikes in Sweida and that they couldn't make any movement forward without Israel's support. Now, we know chaos also broke out along the northern border near Majdal Shams in Israel today after Israeli Druze rushed the border fence into Syria to show solidarity for their loved ones there. Many of the Israeli Druze reunited with their families in the Golan Heights. They've been separated for decades. Syrian Druze also breached the border as well. Like we said, some families reunited with their loved ones for the first time in decades. We have a panel of experts joining us right now, but first we're going to be speaking with ILTV's Kalev Ben David. Kalev, I want to talk about specifically what the response is from the Syrian leaders over what is happening, especially because the United States and Israel are working to normalize these ties. Tell me, what is their response? What is their take on what's happening?
Listen, let's put this in context. Just a few days ago, we were talking about some kind of not full diplomatic relations, but some kind of normalization of ties between Israel and Syria. Just last week, we had a Syrian national, a peace activist, speak openly in the Knesset about the ties. That was unprecedented. There have been reports in the media here, unconfirmed, of secret talks between Israeli officials and Syrian officials. Some reports even saying this is high, as Sahia Negbi, the head of the Israeli National Security Council, meeting with Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara in a third country, perhaps Abu Dhabi has been mentioned. So just a couple of days ago, we're talking about normalization potential, advancing towards normalization of ties. And here we see these just sort of open warfare now breaking out today between Israel and Syria. You mentioned the reaction. President Ahmed al-Shara is trying to calm the waters. He has released a message calling for, first of all, saying that he's ordering a halt to these Syrian government forces that were heading to that area where the Druze are, saying that he'll protect the rights of the Druze. But it is a question. What is being called into question here, and this is the bigger issue, is just how much control President al-Shara actually has over the country, specifically over the Islamist elements, the extremist Islamist elements that are part of his support base. So that is what is being called into question here. One other thing important to say, the United States has issued a message to Israel to sort of stand down. It's trying to negotiate some kind of, I guess you call it a ceasefire, to calm the situation, which unfortunately right now is still looking potentially explosive. And you mentioned there are now reports of up to 2,000 or more Druze citizens of Israel that have got crossed into Syria, potentially opening themselves up, for example, for possible being kidnapped by some of these Islamist extremist elements. So this is a very volatile situation.
Absolutely. And we know that the Israeli Druze, they not only are, supporters and strong supporters of the state of Israel, many of them, but also of their own families. Let's talk about the division and the separation a lot of these Druze experience. The Israelis in the Golan Heights, the Israeli Druze in the Golan Heights, and to the Syrian Druze. A lot of them are actually family. Kalev, there were very emotional moments today. I know there was a lot of chaos on the border of Israel and Syria today, but these incredible photos and videos of families reuniting in a time of so much hostility towards their minority, this small ethnic group that has so many traditions that they share and such a strong culture. And I think this is symbolic, not just because of the violence and the fight that the Druze community is holding themselves to inside of Sweida and other parts of Syria, but also the fact that the Israeli Druze are willing to do anything to show solidarity as well. I want to speak specifically, if you could talk about the IDF's response. What did they manage to do inside of Syria? What did they target exactly, Kalev?
Well, they targeted, initially they targeted those government forces that were heading to Sweida. That was the initial targets and military targets. But of course, today they extended their fire into Damascus itself, striking the military headquarters, striking even the presidential palace. And we've seen, perhaps we'll be showing some of this incredibly dramatic footage of news anchors and correspondents live on air. Here you see the scenes, and this is look, this is meant as a symbol. This is a warning shot, a very dramatic one, I should say, to the Syrian regime to pull back those government forces that were heading to Sweida, because the Druze there say they are not going to lay down their weapons, which is the demand that was made by the central Syrian regime. So you could have had a open clash, not just between, for example, these Bedouin elements and also Islamist elements in that Sweida area and the Druze, but even between government forces and the Druze. We've seen very dramatic footage of the Druze in Sweida pulling down the Syrian national flag. We've even seen an Israeli flag being raised there. I just want to say one other thing about the Druze, Israeli Druze crossing in. That's indicative of a much bigger story, which is that over the recent couple of years, the Syrian Druze, who historically have at least publicly identified, perhaps as a safety mechanism with the former Assad regime, to protect maybe their relatives in Syria, protect their own future if there would be some kind of peace deal, always publicly express support, allegiance to Syria. Now, in the last couple of years, that shifted with the war in the north, and now we're seeing not just Druze citizens outside the Golan as full Israeli citizens, but these Druze in the Golan more and more have taken Israeli citizenship, demanding that Israel take some kind of action in Syria. So this really just shows a dramatic change. What's happening today is the result of that dramatic change in the Golan in the recent years.
Absolutely, and I've actually done some reporting up in the Golan Heights, speaking with Druze who have been working to actually make sure that the members of their community see the benefits of joining Israeli society. One mayor of one of the small Druze villages up there actually told me they're nearly his entire village at this point, they are all Israeli citizens because of the benefits and the support they do share for the land of Israel. Kala, there's some new reporting coming out from Ynet right now, specifically about the president of Syria. There's a senior Israeli official saying that the president, Shara, actually miscalculated his inner circle, I guess at this point, accusing members of Shara's inner circle of miscalculation amid growing Israeli concern over Syrian troop movements. We know that Syria has wanted, the IDF deployments. They have this buffer zone in the north, just north of the Golan Heights inside of Syria. We know that Syria has wanted the IDF to go away with this, but what could this pose in the future? Where, with these hostilities growing, where could this be now?
Well, again, this raises the specter. Again, there's been a debate in Israel, first of all, about the intentions about Ahmed al-Shara. Is he sincere in wanting to create relations, turning toward the West, controlling these Islamist extremist elements in his coalition? Or is that simply tactical on his part to get the lift of sanctions, which the United States has done, which some Westerns of countries done? He's also trying to get some foreign aid from both the West and also from, for example, from the Gulf states. So there's been a debate about how sincere he is in some of the statements he's made and moves he's made. But beyond that, there was also a debate just how much control he has over Syria. And if this is an indication, as you said, was it a miscalculation, or just he simply didn't have the control over other elements in his ruling coalition that started these military forces that started to go into Sweida. And that raises bigger questions, certainly for Israel, about the cohesiveness of Syria moving forward, and whether Israel is either going to have to maintain some kind of permanent military presence there north of the Golan or in the Syrian Golan, or to go back to an idea which was talked about a couple of months ago and which has been put to the side somewhat, given some of the developments in Syria, of actually some kind of autonomous Druze political and military zone in South Syria, bordering on Israel, bordering on the Golan. So this is today's events really raising many questions about the future of Syria in general, and certainly its relationship with Israel moving forward.
For sure. And that's a fascinating point that you just made. More reporting that's just coming out is that the IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir actually visited the Syrian border this evening, telling troops, quote, "We are acting with determination to prevent the entrenchment of hostile elements beyond the border, to protect the citizens of the state of Israel and to protect harm to the Druze." I also want to mention that there has been a very positive developments in previous months, just recently, where religious Druze leaders from Syria have actually visited the Golan Heights for the first time in decades. This trying to bring and to create this connection between the Druze communities in Israel and Syria has actually been, I think, a priority for the state of Israel. We have seen incredible moments coming out of this. So, of course, the support, you're actually taking a look at that video right now that I mentioned. Of Eyal Zamir. But like I said, the support for the Druze community continues as we
Yes,
know.
but I want to again stress, shows that has been a positive development, the reestablishing of ties between the Israeli Druze and the Golan Druze, many of them were taking Israeli citizenship, and the Syrian Druze. That's been a positive. But unfortunately, we're seeing a potential downside of that today. As I said before, reports of up to and maybe over 2,000 Israeli Druze with Israeli citizenship that have crossed into Syria. That could pose some types of security risk. The Prime Minister and the security establishment are telling Israeli Druze, don't come now. They're actually telling them, don't come to the border, don't cross the border. It is a very delicate security situation that's been developing here. And hopefully that won't develop into what could be a much more complicated situation. All this is indicative of how, in a sense, blurred that border has become on the Golan, between the Israeli Golan and the Syrian Golan, and increasingly porous, and that also poses many complications going forward.
Absolutely. Kalev and David, stay with us. We will be coming back to you after we actually speak with a panel of experts we are bringing on right now. Avi Melamed, the CEO of Inside the Middle East, and Ahmed Sharawi, part of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you both so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us, Josh.
Of course. First off, I want to start off about talking about the current situation inside of Syria. I actually spoke with someone, a Syrian Druze man who is located in one of those predominantly Druze communities inside of Syria, who told me at this rate, they're saying that there's a ceasefire, but it really doesn't feel like one yet. He told me that the fighting was an absolute bloodbath. And he told me specifically, the Druze in Syria are willing to defend their land until the very last breath. What do you make of the fact that this very small ethnic group is fighting so hard to maintain who they are? Ahmed, we'll start with you.
So first of all, to start, I think the Druze have had concerns over the new government in Damascus since the downfall of the Assad regime. Given its jihadist background, its the leader the president Ahmed al-Shara was a former leader of Al-Qaeda, Amir of Jabhat al-Nusra. And so the situation was that there was fears over the sectarian nature that might be adopted by this government, is that it might seek retribution, and it might view the Druze and the Alawites as infidels and act against them. And so they resisted integrating into the state until they saw guarantees and actions from the Syrian government that guaranteed their equal representation in the system and their livelihoods. And until now, we haven't seen any political settlement between the government in Damascus and the Druze in Sweida, and that's why we came to this conclusion, one where there is increased chaos, weapons all over the place, militias, whether Druze or Bedouin, and no order. So I think this was bound to happen, given that there was no solution. But I mean, the Druze have shown that they are willing to fight for their land. They're a very strong but small community that really cares about preserving its local economy and characteristic. And that's why we're seeing this fierce opposition to the new Syrian government.
I want to ask you about what the catalyst of these violent clashes actually were, Ahmed. We've been covering all of these clashes that have happened in the past. Just a few months ago, these clashes happened again, but it was over a rumor that was spread about a Druze religious leader that caused, an uproar of violence against the Druze community inside of Syria. But why this? Why is the small Druze community in Syria having to battle one of the Bedouin tribes in addition to the government forces? What was the reason for all of this violence?
So this started on July 10th when a Druze merchant, his truck was stopped on the Damascus Sweida highway, and he was robbed by Bedouins and kidnapped, and they later released him, which created this cycle of kidnapping and abductions between the Druze and the Bedouins, which created this sense of insecurity in the Sweida province and led to severe clashes between the Bedouin tribes and the Druze militias. This is not a one-time thing. The Druze and the Bedouins have been fighting each other even before the creation of the Syrian state. Although Sweida is a majority, has a Druze majority, but there is a sizable Bedouin minority, and they've been fighting over land for decades now. However, this time, the Syrian government decided to intervene and allowed the Bedouins to receive reinforcements from other provinces, which prompted the Druze to resist the Syrian government. I think yesterday it was the first time the Syrian government entered the city of Sweida, even though there were reports that the spiritual leadership agreed to the entry of the government forces and the dismantlement of the militias. One Druze leader by the name of Hikmat al-Hijri decided to reject this deal and sought to resist against the Syrian advance or the Syrian government's advance into the Sweida city. So we can see that maybe the origins of this specifically this conflict was not sectarian, but like you see how things evolve. Kidnapping, now we're seeing full strife in a very important region where Israel has interfered now, and we're seeing the Syrian government also being part or taking part in heavy clashes against Druze militias.
Obviously a very volatile situation. You have two different ethnic groups fighting, but I think it goes back to your point, the concern of this new regime that has stepped into power into Syria. Avi, I want to go to you. I want to talk about the IDF's response to this violence. Talk to me and explain to our viewers why the IDF has decided to protect the Druze community inside of Syria.
Well, Shosh, thank you for having me. It's the Israeli government policy. The IDF is basically conducting the policy. The bottom line is the following bottom line. Israel, the current government, in the bottom line, views al-Jolani as a wolf disguised in sheep clothing. I know that there are different aspects regarding al-Jolani's path, whether he's real, pragmatic, or he's just pretending, but it's very clear that the current situation, Israeli government is sending a message that says, we view al-Jolani as a potential threat, and his people are potential threat. And so this is one aspect of the Israeli decision to interfere. The other thing has to do, of course, with the Druze in Israel. Particularly remember that there are Druze in Israel who are serving in the army. And there is a concern that Israeli Druze soldiers will cross the border to go to Sweida and to defend their brothers. It's part of the Druze system, socially, culturally, politically, historically, that they are mutually guaranteeing each other. In other words, whenever Druze are in distress, facing challenges, the brothers will rush to their help, and particularly against the background of the very disturbing reports coming out from Sweida and documented, some of them, in the last couple of days. And finally, I would say that it has also to do with the major shift that took place in Israeli geostrategic security policy following October 7. Prior to October 7, there was the major feature or a major feature in Israeli security geostrategic policy was the containing and restraining. That is old history now following October 7. Now there is a very clear Israeli decision to eliminate any kind of emerging potential threat. And it's very clear that at this point, the Israeli government views al-Jolani and his government as a source of a threat. And then there is another layer that we have to notice. This is also an indirect message to Turkey. We have to remember that Turkey is the one that to a large extent backed and supported al-Jolani. Was basically Turkey that following the defeat of the Hezbollah in the war with Israel, it was Turkey that was standing beyond the offensive of the Syrian rebels in the end of November and December 2024, resulting in the downfall of Assad regime. So I think that there is another significant aspect that we have to notice in that regard. And then finally, one last note about the Druze in Syria. The Druze in Syria is not one camp, solid camp. There are different camps within. One of them mentioned here, Hikmat al-Hijri. There is another person, Jarbush, and there are others. There are inner camps within the Druze in Syria. Some of them are playing ball with the regime. Some of them, of course, are not. We also should be tuned to the inner Druze politics inside Syria because it's not one camp.
Right. Right. But I want to go back to your point specifically about the regional, the ties here and what's at stake for the region. You know, we know that President Donald Trump and his entire administration is working to not only instill peace here, but to create some type of deal where people in other countries can join, bringing together the Arab world, the state of Israel, and also the United States together. I also want to bring Ahmed back into this conversation. We'll start with you here. What does this mean now for the region? We know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio specifically is now discussing, this de-escalation that they want to see. But could this have implications to the future of what the Trump administration is trying to achieve here?
So, of course, it depends on how Shara deals with the aftermath of this, and whether there's a political settlement to the question in Sweida, or whether military activities will continue and Israeli strikes will continue. I think as long as the military battles continue, the chances of a possible deal between Israel and Syria erodes day by day. On the other hand, I think if the jihadist coalition, or if those who committed crimes and violations, human rights abuses against the Druze in Sweida were not held accountable by Shara himself, then the United States should start looking into Shara and trying to understand if this man is sticking to his word that he seeks to build a stable Syria where different groups can prosper, or whether he was just saying that to get sanctions relief. So we might see a shift in U.S. policy when it comes, if Shara fails to hold people accountable, hold people who committed crimes. But at the same time, I think we're moving towards a political solution to this issue. I think the people in Sweida, or at least just like the other guest said, the Druze are not in one camp, and I think two of the three spiritual leaders are open to negotiations with Damascus and are open to a ceasefire with Damascus. Then we might see a political settlement. The question remains of whether the other factions who are more aligned with Israel will continue resisting the state's control, because that would mean that Israel will likely continue striking military assets in southern Syria and will refuse the presence of the Syrian military in southern Syria. And as I said, that risks the possibility of any sort of normalization security deal in the future between Syria and Israel. From the other, we've seen statements by Saudi Arabia, for example, that have approved of Shara's actions in Sweida. So that, he does not risk losing the Arab street because of what's happening. But the spotlight now is on Israel and the United States and how they decide to deal with Shara following the events in Sweida.
Avi, I want to go back to you and specifically talk about how Syrians are feeling right now, Druze Syrians, about the IDF's response in terms of the airstrikes that have hit Sweida in addition to Damascus. One Syrian Druze man told me today that without Israel's response, they feel like they cannot advance, and they feel like they wouldn't have a stake here. They wouldn't be able to succeed and make sure that they do stand their ground. How do you see the response from the IDF today? We saw really crazy visuals actually behind a journalist reporting in Damascus. An airstrike hit a building just behind her. I don't know if we have that video, but these are the airstrikes we are discussing, 3 large ones right there on these buildings. Is this a large response? Is it too large? Or is this exactly what you would expect from the IDF when it comes to these clashes?
I think the essence of the response today is that Israel sends a message to the region and to the United States as well. The bottom line, Israel does not see al-Shara or his government as a legitimate counterpart. Israel thinks that al-Shara and his government is a wolf disguised in a sheep clothing. And I think that this is the major message that comes out today. Look, this attack on the headquarters of the Syrian army obviously is disproportional in context of the events that happened in Sweida. So this attack on this headquarters is contain double messages. One is to al-Shara himself, but not less significant, as I said before, to the international community, to the region, and particularly to the United States. Israel does not buy, apparently the government, the bottom line, does not buy the concept that al-Shara is playing ball and al-Shara is pragmatic and al-Shara can deliver. Israel basically say, we don't believe that. We think that we are looking at nothing else that is Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and hence the magnitude of the Israeli response as we saw it today.
Avi and Ahmed, thank you both so much for being with us today on this panel, giving your perspectives, as I know the situation in Syria continues to evolve, and we will see what tomorrow will bring. Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And as we continue to follow this news that the United States is working to de-escalate parts of what is happening inside of Syria, we also know that the current ceasefire is the second one to be established after these violent clashes happened. Just yesterday, there was a ceasefire that was broken today. So it is unclear at this time how long the ceasefire will last. I think officials, American officials specifically, are hoping that this will be a permanent one. I want to welcome back Khaled Ben David from ILTV, joining us now to discuss more about the United States' role in trying to get some type of ceasefire plan in place. Why is this so important to the Trump administration?
Right, that's a good question. Now we have to look at, for example, the man who is doing the diplomacy for the point man for U.S. diplomacy on Syria is the Special Envoy to Syria, Tom Barak, a diplomat, but he is not coincidentally also the U.S. ambassador to Turkey. And Turkey, we haven't really discussed the role of Turkey here, which is pretty crucial because, of course, following the collapse of the Assad regime and Iran's and Russia's role basically being kind of eliminated in Syria, Turkey has now become the main foreign player in Syria and the main backer of the al-Shara government. It's very significant. The Trump administration is trying to improve relations with Turkey. Remember, President Trump has certainly a much, I don't know if you want to call it warmer, but more closer relationship or supportive relationship with President Erdogan of Turkey than, for example, the Biden administration did. And Turkey has, of course, the major role there in Syria. The Trump administration wants to keep those relations with Ankara stable and maybe improve them. And part of that equation is keeping quiet in Syria. And Tom Barak, the envoy, just yesterday, you talked about a ceasefire, called on all sides to de-escalate. Unfortunately, we did see an escalation today, including on Israel's side. And there are reports, for example, in Israeli media tonight that he spoke with Ron Dermer, the Minister for Regional Affairs, and of course the closest advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and basically said Israel has to stand down. But at the same time, we are hearing from Israeli security officials they're going to do what's necessary, just like Avi Malamed said, to get that message across that Israel's concerned about what's happening in Syria, and they are concerned about President Ahmed al-Shara. And Israel's made no secret of the fact it feels that the Trump administration was too hasty in lifting those U.S. sanctions on Syria following that face-to-face meeting here in the region between President Trump and President al-Shara.
And Kalev, actually, brand new information that's coming through right now from the IDF. Specifically, we mentioned that the IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir went to the border near the Golan Heights today on the border of Syria and Israel. And he said, quote, "We are acting decisively to prevent the entrenchment of the hostile elements beyond the border." We discussed that. But we also discussed his how he wants to prevent and to protect the Druze community. Can you talk a little bit about just the history of the Druze, the Israeli Druze inside of the Golan Heights, and their connection to the Syrian Druze for our viewers who might not understand the historical context behind something like this?
Right. First of all, we have to separate between the Druze on the Golan Heights, who have only come under Israeli sovereignty in 1967, and the Druze that live in the rest of Israel proper, who have been with Israel since, the state of Israel from 1948. They had connections with the Zionist movement even prior to that. So that is Druze community outside the Golan Heights has been integrated into Israel more fully than any other Arab-speaking minority in the country since 1948. They serve, they play key positions, serve key positions in the IDF. Some rising to the rank of general. They have served as diplomats. They have put judges on the high court. So those Israeli Druze, again, they're a minority and they have their issues as a minority in a Jewish state, but they have been more full. Those Druze have been more fully integrated into Israel than any other Arab-speaking minority in the country. The Druze on the Golan are different. It was only in 1967 that they fell under Israeli sovereignty, and they number somewhere between, I think, 20, 30,000. And they've had historically they maintain their ties to Syria. Like you said before, they have close family, some of them right across that border on the Golan Heights in Syria. That's a factor. So that most of them for many years did not take Israeli citizenship, did not serve in the army, did not view themselves as full Israeli citizens. But as one of the guests talked about that, there has been that change. And you've talked about you seeing that attitude on the Golan. That's a fairly recent phenomena, dating back, for example, in 2012, when the Arab Spring arrived in Damascus and you saw massive protests against the Assad regime. That has accelerated in the past couple of years with the war in the north. And we've seen, of course, missile rockets being fired from Lebanon, Hezbollah, by Lebanon and Syria, landing on the Golan. And, of course, that terrible incident in Majdal Shams, the major Druze town on the Golan, killing a dozen children. All that has pushed the Golan Druze to be more like the Israeli Druze, the Druze who have been in Israel in 1948. And so now we're seeing another progression. Now those Druze on the Golan are going even further and saying they want Israel to take military action in Syria against the current Syrian regime in order to help their Druze brethren across the border.
Right. There's so many changes happening. And I think it's because of these terror proxies that surround Israel. And like you said, it's actually almost 1 year since those 12 children in Majdal Shams were killed by a Hezbollah missile that landed on a soccer field in the evening around 6 p.m. The 1 year of that horrible day that so many people in Israel remember is actually next week. I think that this time for a lot of the Druze, it comes with a lot of emotion to know that this marks the 1 year anniversary of a horrific time for their community. But not only that, now they have their brothers, their sisters, their family members being targeted inside of Syria as well. I think this brings a lot of heightened emotion for their communities, for their families, of course. Kalev, I want to change gears a little bit right now. I want to tell our viewers less than an hour ago, Israel was under attack by a Houthi ballistic missile that was launched from Yemen. We know that it was successfully intercepted by the IDF, but sirens sounded in the area of the Dead Sea and the southern Negev. First off, let's discuss that. Just the fact that as so many different fronts have opened up within the last 2 years, Israel is still consistently trying to take down ballistic missiles that target this country. Can you talk a little bit about what's new with the Houthis, if we know of anything, in addition to their capabilities now?
Sure. The concern over the Houthis, as you said, they've continued. They have not stopped. They've consistently been launching their rockets, their missiles against Israel. Fortunately, Israel's air defense systems have proven very effective at stopping those missiles before they either reach Israel or intercepting them when they're over Israeli territory. But the big concern with the Houthis now is actually not the missiles against Israel. It's the renewed attacks against international shipping in the Red Sea. Some of those ships coming toward Israel to the port of Eilat, and we did see an attack on a freighter, a Greek-flagged freighter, I think last week, and a deadly attack. There are still sailors missing. Some are presumed to perhaps even have been caught by the Houthis, and that attack seems to have violated the agreement, the assurances that they gave to the U.S. to President Trump when he announced this sort of a truce, if you were, a ceasefire with the Houthis, was supposed to have stopped those attacks on international shipping in the Bab el-Wad Straits and in the Red Sea. And there have been calls in the United States. There have been calls in the U.S. Senate, for example, some U.S. senators who have said that the Houthis have violated the treaty, the agreement they made with the United States, and the U.S. Has to now renew perhaps some kind of offensive action against the Houthis because of their attacks on shipping. And that certainly is the makers, and it's a concern for Israel because a lot of those ships are key toward Israel's trade with Asia. Those are ships heading to the Gulf of Eilat and the port of Eilat.
Right. And I want to move forward and talk a little bit about the current negotiations underway in Doha right now. For our viewers who continue to follow us, we have been tracking the developments on this, of course, since first they started about 10 days ago when a team of Israeli negotiators went to Doha to actually start this negotiation to see if Hamas will also come to the table to show flexibility. There is new reporting coming out from the Times of Israel right now saying that Israel has agreed to significantly decrease its force presence in Gaza during the 60-day ceasefire that's currently on the table right now, this proposal. This is, of course, according to their sources at the Times of Israel. Tell me what you have learned so far this week about
other
the
reports are more
negotiations.
specific. Right. Other reports are more specific in talking about that withdrawal. They actually, and these are unconfirmed, I have to say, they have not been confirmed by any Israeli officials, but that Israel has agreed to withdraw out of what's called the Morag corridor. That's significant. This is basically road, if you want to call it a roadway or passageway, cutting across the lower part of the Gaza Strip, basically separating Rafah, right there you see it there. That's the Morag corridor, the one that's going up and down, and that basically separates the area of Rafah and Rafah City from the rest of the Gaza Strip. Why is the Morag corridor so significant? Because that has been there has been this Israeli plan to relocate much of the population that's north of that in Gaza, move them south into Rafah. In order to, for example, both for security considerations, security concerns, and also to allow eventually to start working on the reconstruction of those areas of Gaza that are north of the Morag corridor. So there are some reports in Israeli media this evening that said Israel, which reportedly for past 2 weeks has been insisting to maintain control of the Morag corridor, is willing to pull back from that at least for the 60 days. So there are some positive developments, but Shosh, you and I know we have to be very careful here. Every time we say there's progress or things have got, there's been progress and a deal is imminent. There's been some delays,
Kalev,
so we have to be.
I don't want to interrupt, but we do need to end the broadcast. Thank you so much for being with us. We will continue to follow all of the live updates here on ILTV on the hour.